line of air. have Freeman like do his thing by the light, and then on my phone, like impromptu. Oh, I'm still on the.
Oh, yeah, then you can just be on live. Oh.
Hello, Giselle.
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning, Alvin. Here we are again. Nice. Oh, you're in the car. I was just telling Mario that maybe, well, as one of the fireside chats, we should invite people again like Michael, Seville, Joey, and Carlito to speak, um, to share their experiences on, how we can improve science in the Philippines.
Yeah,
And
yes.
today there's another batch. Today there's another group that's, going to talk. So it's nice to hear their experiences. Or even Arnel Salvador, no? So yung mga former co-awardees, very good experience. Not only with the research, very good output, but also about mentoring and training and building the lab facility, right? Yan eh.
Yeah.
So many
Yes,
things
right.
now we can do, and we will discuss this at the board meeting, probably in the third week of October, just to give everyone a rest. Kasi this has been tough for them, no? Grabe, the arrangements that Leia and the Mario are responsible for, the whole team. There's so many also who work to make this possible. So great.
When do, Giselle, when do we hold the
I was
the
thinking,
one with Secretary BGMA and
yes, we will do it
EFA?
likely in mid-March or mid to third week of, sorry, not March, November. But
November.
I'll first clear the schedule.
Okay.
May, but likely she will be free. And then
Okay.
I'm trying to get the photo of the marker. Your photos.
Which one?
Your own photos about her speech at the 2007 APAMS.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
have those valuable
I
photos.
have I've included them in my PowerPoint. So she
Yes.
was there. You were there. Secretary Boy was there. Secretary
that.
Effa was there. All of you were there.
Yes.
So
saw
all of us,
that.
I was there. So we can show it. I think it will give her, refresher of those,
Yeah,
Yep.
it will make Sefa happy as well. So if she's in your division, so I'm sure she will be like that. No, and I will dig up the some of the photos in my house. No,
Yes, yes, yeah,
wala lang
Yep.
talaga akong panahon sa ngayon. It's so tough.
yeah. It's fine.
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean, because
actually,
I do everything myself.
yeah.
With help
Actually,
only from
I
Rachel.
went to the university to pick up those photos and scan them.
Yes. Imagine that. Yeah, but I'm not allowed to go to MSI. And it's
Mhm.
only now that they're opening up again after the surge. You have to give advance notice and you have to get permission from the director. And then during stricter lockdowns, it has to go up the line to the dean and then maybe to the vice chancellor, ganon.
Mhm.
UP. Because we have had such cases. So even Chancellor Fidel had an infection. You probably know that Cesar and Cynthia had COVID, no? You have Alisa, you have people we know. Yeah.
Hey, are you Giselle?
Yes.
Are you aware that they have a fire alarm over there at the hotel?
Just now they had a fire alarm.
Yes, and they all went out of the hotel. It's
Oh,
freezing.
I see. All right. So perhaps
I'll show you
that
the
caused the
photos.
delay.
So we have to wait a little bit.
Okay. Thing is at 9:30 I'm giving my talk in Rec
No,
5.
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. You mean the rec?
Rec 5, yes.
Yeah, rec starts at 10 o'clock. I think we,
Moved
because
it.
there is still a plenary. So
That's
we,
right. But then the rec chair should let everyone know because mine is scheduled at 9:30.
all right. In my case, rec 8, I informed everyone. Yeah.
All
But
right.
anyway, I think we might be able to finish at 9:30 anyway. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Yesterday we finished at 9:30, around a little over
Yes,
9.
yes.
So I think we can do that. Yeah. So they are still out, I think. I sent you a photo
I know, I saw it.
where they are outside the hotel.
Yes, exactly. There is Manix, Baha. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Well, there's Lulu Harold, I think. Must be Lulu.
Yep. So last night there were still a couple of people actually who stayed.
Yes. Ooh, Ernie Terrado. Yeah, it's great. Of course, Lisa V. is there. There's Rosalie. How I wish I had gone, but it's just not wise for me to do it as well because we suddenly had the surge. Remember, it was just before the surge, and then after the
Yeah.
surge, and then my passport did not arrive earlier um, than planned because there was a mistake. I had it renewed in America, and then the DFA here sent it back there to San Francisco. So I lost 2 weeks. And in the meantime, to be honest, of course, aside from the surge, the tickets were just so expensive already.
Mm-hmm.
And then here you got Carlitos preventing me from leaving. So it's really tough. Yeah. Anyway.
Anyway, yeah. I also wanted to go, but the university did not give us permission.
Yeah. And then, of course,
Anyway.
when Sec Boy and Yusek Gev said that they would not travel, then the pressure was further reduced, no? For us to be present there.
Yes, yeah. Right.
Because otherwise, I would have arranged. I told Mario, would be nice is if we had a chance to visit some of the labs
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
led by them.
Actually, I
Yeah.
prepared a plan, but so I can visit some lab, but the university did not permit any faculty to travel. So
Mhm. Wow.
so we're just waiting for them, but it's still 7:16 anyway. So I think
Yes.
we can still start on time.
Sean is with us. All right, we will just wait.
Okay
So
then.
Sean can hear
Sure,
our conversation like everyone else.
sure. Okay. See you later then.
See.
Okay, good evening. That time, I and my children had a chance to visit our keynote speaker in his office about 10 years ago. He asked a challenging question, and I'll change this a bit, okay? He asked this question. There are 29 firemen. 20 have dogs,
Yes.
and 15 have cats. How many firemen have both cats and dogs? So you can see that you can tell that he's a mathematician. Okay,
But don't try to answer it now, because you'll be wrong.
a brilliant one, whom I have heard him say probably twice or thrice that he gets goosebumps with mathematics. But Dr. Freeman A. Rabowski III, the president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, does not just ask difficult math questions. He asks even more difficult questions about race, society, diversity, inclusion, equity. This fondness to ask difficult questions had led him, when he was just 12 years old, to join the Children's Crusade March for Civil Rights in 1963, which led to his arrest, along with many others who joined the march. The search for answers to difficult questions led him to venture in a very impressive journey in leadership in higher education, particularly concerning access to high-quality STEM education. He is a strong advocate of representation, engagement, and success of STEM students of all backgrounds. He's also well known as the founder of the Meyerhoff Scholars Program, a nationally acclaimed program for underrepresented groups, which has produced the likes of former Surgeon General Jerome Adams and the lead scientist for Moderna, Dr. Rizzi Corbett. Dr. Rabowski is a multi-awarded, nationally known university president and a social leader whom you often can see talking to students around the UMBC campus. He personifies the combination of brilliance and humility. In Filipino, these are talino and kababaang loob. He and his wife were one of the first to volunteer for the trial of Moderna. Scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. Here's to deliver his keynote address tonight. Please welcome the president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a human being par excellence, Dr. Freeman A. Rabowski.
One of his children did a piece on me years ago.
I think it doesn't fit.
Is that a fit there? Okay, all right. And I'll never forget, I was so touched. It was a Martin Luther King. So they had to do something on, and he did it on me. And he won. It was just so special. How are you now?
22.
God, this shows how many years ago that was. I probably need this for the electronic thing. I'll keep it here. I'm delighted to be here. I really am. And I've got two of my favorite Michaels here. Michael Peruginen, who is from NYU, as you know. He said, just say Michael, they don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, but Michael and I served together on the Sloan board. And perhaps we've been the two people of color, been one more sometimes Mary and others, but it's been quite an experience and we share similar values and got a chance to take him to campus. And then my colleague, Mike Summers, who's speaking later. Mike is actually on the cover of one of my books because he's one of the leading producers of African Americans in science. I don't think there's anybody in the country who's produced more people of color who've gone on to get PhDs and PhDs than Mike, and I'm very proud of him. So both of them are here. But let me start. I was so moved for so many reasons. First of all, Mario is a thought partner. As we've written articles together, he's a part of our research team as we take very seriously this notion of how do we evaluate what we're doing as we work to increase the number of people of color in science and engineering. When we started that movement, what is significant is that, I'm hearing myself, is that two of the wonderful scientists in the room reminded me that I gave the eulogy for someone years ago, and that was Fabino Coe. And I gave that eulogy because he was one of my dearest friends, and represented for me the best of humankind. The best of he and Paz were absolutely amazing. And what I will say to you is that no greater honor could we have had than when their granddaughter came to UMBC and was in this MyHealth program that I'm going to talk about tonight, and has gone on to get an MD PhD. He's an oncologist now and works at FDA and is there on the faculty at the University of Maryland. So I begin with that notion that somehow we are connected in different ways. I decided after talking with Mario to think about this notion of the Filipino community here and in the Philippines and science. Because most of us, even when talking about underrepresentation, know very little. Let me start there. I chaired the National Academy's Committee on Underrepresentation 10 years ago. And the heavy emphasis was on the lack of Blacks, the shortage of Blacks and Latinos. And what people will often say is we've got an overrepresentation in a positive way of Asians. But what they don't say with specificity is, but there are certain groups that are underrepresented. And that's one of my messages to you tonight, that you are such an amazingly kind group, just holistically. People know that about my students. The Filipino Student Association on my campus would be the sweetest group there. They just are. I love talking with them. They're smart and they're just kind, all right? That's good, but it's a double-edged sword. I would challenge you to think about ways of making sure this country understands we need to bring more specificity to the issues of underrepresentation. Because we do have underrepresentation among Filipinos, and most people don't realize the Filipino population, I think, is the second largest Asian American group in our country. And so sometimes what happens is we think about the larger group, and we have large numbers of kids from China and whose parents are from China, large numbers from India, and we stop there, although we know there are other groups from Southeast Asia and other, but I think we're getting to the point in our development, in our evolution as a country, that we will need to bring more specificity. Just as I have to say that Black does not mean Black does not mean Black. My students who are the children of people from the islands and Africa will have a very different perspective from those who've been in this country for generations. We love them all, but we need to understand those differences. And so one of the points I want to make from the beginning is the need for specificity, the need for those specific groups to have voice and to be understood. What are their challenges? And so one of the things I did was to go back and look at our history with Filipino students. And I learned some things from Bino. From the beginning, Bino said, Freeman, you must think of us as people of color. And we're not the same as some other groups of Asians. He was very specific about that. And he had this very charming way of getting his way. He did in America. He was perfectly charming. You could never get angry with him, but he would finally get you to get his point. It was wonderful. And I will tell you that one of the Myhawks, this Myhawk program is focused on increasing the number of underrepresented people in science and engineering with the goal of producing PhDs and MD PhDs. And I will tell you that we are the #1 producer of African Americans in the country, of bachelor's recipients who go on to complete PhDs. And that's going on to Stanford or Harvard or Georgia Tech or MIT or whatever. And some of them are now in the faculties at those places. And there's a pipeline there for that group, more and more for the Latino group. But we have, in the meantime, as soon as we began saying, let's go with underrepresentation, the Filipino group became very important. So we have a number of Filipino Myhawks at this point. My campus is 10 minutes from here. If you haven't seen it, get Marios and get you over there somehow. You need to see the campus before you leave. I think Michael was surprised. It's 600 acres. It's not in the city. It's right by the airport. We have about 14,000 students, of whom 11,000 are undergrads, 3,000 are grad students. We got now in expenditures, 90-some million in research. No medical school. It's arts and sciences and engineering, and then humanities and social science. A lot of scientists with career awards, NIH, R01 awards. I'm very proud of Michael Summers, who's both Howard Hughes and National Academies, and very convinced that we need to be involved with diversity. And that's what I wanted to say. It's like the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. I wish I had made it up. It's from Jim Collins. It's great, all right? But it sounds so clever. Right? But it's the idea of, yes, first-rate research and an emphasis on helping students to pull them along. And so one of the things I did in preparation for this talk was to ask some of my Myhawks who are Filipino to tell me what they thought I should say. Okay, I'm a strong believer. It was Joel who asked me the question, what's the big challenge that presidents have, the college presidents have? One of them is to listen, to not be defensive, and to listen to faculty, listen to students, even if you don't like what they say. Let's listen and see how we can find the common ground. But I was fascinated with the comments made, and I want to just read one or two of them. And these are things that are not new to you, but you need to hear. These are young people who are now PhDs, Erin Cabrera and his brother Ramon, one with a PhD from NYU in neurobiology, another with an MD PhD, Cal with a PhD from Purdue in engineering, Gerald with a PhD from Georgia Tech. And let me just tell you what they said, just generally. They said, you should know Filipinos will sacrifice anything for their own children and for each other, especially if they are family or considered family. When it comes to my own experiences with minorities in engineering, I have met some Black and Latino PhDs, but it's rare that I meet Filipinos. This is one of my early Myhawks before Bino had died. And okay, keep talking about it. He said, I only met him one time, Dean Cole, one time. He was our founding dean. He said, and we had a wonderful conversation in 10 minutes. And he looked at me and made me feel special, and I never forgot it. He was the first PhD in engineering Filipino I've met. And that was all I needed, just to see that one existed. That may sound strange to some people, but it makes a difference when you see some people like yourself. And then he said that Filipinos fundamentally understand that higher education, that higher socioeconomic status can be achieved primarily through education. But at most, the emphasis will be on medical doctors and lawyers. That there is not the emphasis on the PhD. Now that's true for groups of color in general. You need to know that. I mean, we have really worked, because people would say to us, well, is a PhD a real doctor? Right? You know, they're thinking it's only an MD, that's all they know, right? So Michael gives a talk to parents about that, a fabulous talk that he made about why it's important to think about PhDs, helping people you may never see. It's a very profound idea. And then he said, programs like MAHOF are needed, especially for our community, for the Filipino community, because we need to know the path to the PhD. We need people telling us it's great. We need people telling our families it's okay to get a PhD, not to be an MD if we don't want you. Now, one of our compromises in general, and you see PAS did it, was to talk about the MD PhD. Well, if you really want to do medicine, let's look at research and medicine together. So the MD PhD. Merle and I've done research on that, and it's worked well. It really has. So we literally produce 2.5 times as many Blacks who want to get MD PhDs than the next school, which is Harvard, then number 2. Okay, to put it in perspective. And our population is very diverse. We are 25% of Asian background. We have Chinese and Indian would be the 2 largest, but a substantial Filipino population. The Filipino student population, and that student group, BASA, is very active on our campus. Most are with parents from the Philippines. A few are directly from the Philippines. And we are probably 40% white now, and a lot of students from other countries, and about 20% Black. It's Baltimore. One of the challenges with the Black population is we're still working to build K through 12, so they can come to us and do well in science and engineering. Yet we are able to produce students who are at the top. That woman who created the mRNA technology, led the team, Kismikia, is the first Black woman in the world to create a vaccine. Very significant. And it's just for young women to see a young woman who's created one says, I can do this too. It's very important. The Surgeon General, young Black kid from Southern Maryland, rural, had never even seen a Black physician. You see, so in many of these cases, whether it's for Blacks, Latinos, Filipinos, they've not seen the people. You don't really think you can do it if you haven't seen it. And that's part of the challenge that we face. The other point that they made that you will appreciate is that they said that the MAHA program gave us that sense of belonging. And for us, feeling that you belong is very important. One of the challenges for students of color in many situations is that they are almost on the periphery. They're in some minority group and somebody's nice to them. They don't get to know faculty. And they're not being pulled into the work. My TED Talk focuses on 4 pillars of success in science. And I would say it's true for any group. Number 1 is high expectations. But what's different is it's not just high expectations of the students, it's high expectations of us. There's the difference. There's the difference. When we chaired the National Academies Committee, when I did with my colleagues on underrepresentation, people were shocked at the percent of students who made it. Let me ask you a question. What percent of whites who begin with a major, undergrad major in science or engineering actually graduate with a bachelor's in science and engineering? What do you think? I heard 50%. 20? Don't be risk averse, just try. See, I know all of you accustomed to get A's, so you like to wait till you know before you say anything. What'd you say? 40%. For whites, it's 32%. 32, we were stunned. We were stunned. What percent, but everybody thinks of the Asian population doing better in science, and they do, but some populations more than others, depending on whether they've had the opportunities, right? So the problem is when you just broadly say Asian, that means so much. That's the problem. And that's what we do in America right now. But what percent of Asians? 60. I heard 60, I heard 70. It's actually only 41%, which shocked us all. We had faculty from MIT and Harvard to Howard University to Texas El Paso. So we had faculty from everywhere. They were so shocked. They just thought the majority of Asians would make it. They thought at least half of whites would make it. And then for Blacks and Latinos, it's only about 20%. The result is that only 5% of the bachelors in our country are awarded in natural sciences and engineering. In natural sciences and engineering. You'll get a slightly larger number if you put in the social sciences. But I'm going with natural, that's where you have the worst situation. It's really exacerbated in those areas. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that high expectations would mean that universities would be embarrassed when the majority of students of any race who start in science are weeded out. We still call the first year of science in America weed out courses. That's so expectations. Number two, building community among students. It's very important. If you get a chance, look at the Meyerhoff program and the 60 Minutes piece that was done 10 years ago. You put in UMBC in 60 minutes, Meyerhoff in 60 minutes, what you'll see, it's only 15 minutes. And it focuses on community, building community. From the bridge program before it starts through, what you will find surprising is we take the phones from them. I got hate mail around the country because they said, this is America. You cannot take somebody's phone. The parents said, yeah, take their phones, all right? But you know who recommended them take their phones? The students from the summer before. We asked them the question, how can we get you to bond more? They said, take their phones away. Because during the week, they're still talking with their friends from high school or their mothers every night, right? It made all the difference. Then, because they didn't have the external opportunities, they went inward and they built community up. They began to support each other. Third, it takes, this is probably the most important, it takes scientists to produce scientists. It cannot just be minority staff members who are wonderful for the emotional support. It takes getting people into the labs. And the one defining characteristic that Mike can talk about and my other colleagues is we pull undergrads, not just the grads and postdocs, undergrads into the research early. And this area is very fortunate, the Baltimore Washington Carter, because we have so many scientific organizations, NIH and NASA Goddard and NSA. We're the leading producer of students who go to work in math and computing at NSA. But we have large numbers of students whose parents work at NIH, at different institutes. And the students get to work there in high school. So many of them know they have good hands before they even get to us. So that's, and the key is that we are very diverse internationally and domestic. What percent of my students, now remember we're right here in Baltimore. Baltimore is 15 minutes away. So people have an image of Baltimore, but what percent of my students do you think have at least one parent from another country? Take a guess. Like 30?
60.
50? What I hear?
60.
See, she's good. She's very good. Good guess. Good guess. Did you know already? But no, it is 60%. 60% of my students of every ethnic and racial group have at least one parent from another country. Sometimes they're from military families. Sometimes they're from diplomacy. Sometimes they're from the intelligence community. Often they have mixed marriages, interracial marriages. Mike is going to talk about some of those tonight, including Filipinos. And so it is this campus of the world. It feels like in New York, Mike, the Plaza of Nations at the UN. You don't think of Baltimore being there. Now, why do I tell you that? Because I think there's an opportunity around the country. When you have people from other countries, you tend to feel that intensity. And if you can use that to get other kids who may have been there for generations to see, look at how hard she's working. It does make people work hard. It really, and that's our culture. And so the idea, high expectations, scientists produce scientists, building community, and then finally, rigorous evaluation. That's what America comes in. Rigorous evaluation. The challenge, I would say, for your community is that you don't have so much data. You know, anecdotally, there's underrepresentation. But you need to be able to do what we did with NSF and say, no, we need the data. We need to know. Because if you're going to make progress and say you move to the next, you need to know what the baseline is. Well, you know the numbers are small. It's so funny. Every Filipino scientist I know, and I don't know 2 or 3, will tell me I know most of them, right? But there needs to be some way you use your skills and your prestige to get the country to acknowledge where you are now if you're going to be able to go to the next level. That would be my recommendation to you. It took a long time. I chaired the Obama Commission on Education for African Americans. I couldn't get the national agencies to give me the data. They kept saying, well, if we give you this data, it will embarrass universities because the numbers are so small. Okay, so here's a stunning statistic that you'll appreciate. Under 2% of the scientists throughout the national infrastructure, NIH, NSF, NASA, NSA, under 2%, well under 2% are Black. And for Latinos, it may be between 3 and 4%. And finally, when we did the study 10 years ago on the Crossroads, American Science and Technology at the Crossroads, we found that of the PhDs, just looking for Blacks for a minute, of all the PhDs produced each year, 10 years ago, 2.2% were earned by Blacks, 2.2%. We've had all this effort. 10 years later, we're at 2.3%. You get what I'm saying? We really have. Now, if we hadn't had the baseline data, we wouldn't be able to say we have not made progress. It's a lot of fanfare, but we're not making progress. So I want you to look at the most recent article we wrote on issues in science and technology with my name there and there's several others, but it's on the top 30 institutions for producing Blacks and the top 30 for producing Latinos. But it needs to be the same thing for Filipinos. It really does. Who are the institutions? And Mario is somebody who might be able to do that, because he's been doing this other work. And he brings that sensitivity to all these groups together. And what we argue finally is that if we could take those 30 institutions for both types, and that includes University of Florida has done a good job for Blacks and Latinos, University of Florida, as an example. We are number one for African Americans. University of Texas, El Paso is right behind the two Puerto Rican campuses that are way ahead of everybody for Latinos, way ahead. University of Puerto Rico, Marquez, another, they are really. And the point is this, we said if we double the numbers just in the top 30, we would increase the number of Black PhDs in the country by 30%, and for Latinos by 40%, just by focusing on the campuses that are doing something right now. It's a laser kind of approach. So I'm trying to get national policy people to stop trying new things, go with the places that are making a difference. And my argument to you, what I would say to you, the question would be, how can you identify those campuses that are having some success? We're very proud. The Filipino kids who come to us do really well. I've got about a dozen names right here that I just quickly came up with of people who've gone on and gotten PhDs through the MILE program. And what they say is, what made the difference was that people cared about us, Doc. They cared about us and they wanted us to be proud of our heritage and to see how we could fit with others as leaders. And it makes all the difference in the world. I never thought as a little Black kid growing up in Birmingham that not able to even be in a classroom with white children. I never thought that one day I'd be president of a university with kids from all over the world. And so when people ask me if I'm discouraged about where we are right now, I say, absolutely not. We've been divided before, the 1860s, the 1960s. We have challenges, but all of you know, this is something Bina and I talked about. There he was from the Filipinos, and there I am from another country, Birmingham, Alabama, another country, you get there. And we had so much in common. We had so much in common, the human spirit, things to overcome. Never imagine, I bet you a minute you could say you never could have imagined you would be at the level where you are right now. I mean, it's so powerful to be able to say that. I think we should use our success as inspiration to take others to that level. You represent the best of our society, of our human society. I think you can do anything. I challenge you, as I tell my students, watch your thoughts, they become your words become your actions become your habits become your character becomes your destiny. I tell my students, your character has everything to do with who you are when you don't think your mother can see you. There's your character, all right? So thoughts become words become actions become habits become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anyone from the room?
Challenge me.
Please. That's all.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wanting to add that the director of the National Science Foundation
Yes, punch.
has this has this missing million program. This is the underrepresented African science.
Yes.
It is really
He's very committed.
committed.
He's
to that.
very
Thank
committed.
you very much.
Yeah, he and I are talking. I'm begging for money. Presidents beg for money. That's what we do here.
You got one.
Huh?
You got UNBC got one of the.
One of those grants. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm very proud of that. I really am. My line is a day without an ass is a day without sunshine. I asked somebody for money. So hold your pockets. Let me ask you later on. Other question. Robbie, Nobel laureate in physics, said that when he was growing up in New York, all of his friends' mothers would ask him, "What you learn in school today?" He said, "Not my Jewish mother." He said, "My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" And that practice made him the scientist he became. Isn't that a wonderful thought? It really is. So somebody ask me a good question. Please, please, you're a scientist.
So who inspired you?
Oh God, my grandmother first. She went to the 6th grade and they wouldn't let her continue in school, but she was brilliant. She read all the time and she broke the barrier, became the first Black in the little county to vote in the 60s because there was an Alabama literacy test. And while whites could come up and just put an X there because they couldn't read and write either, my grandmother could write, but they would give her a test, very difficult test. And so she got some women to go with her and they went twice and she got them to memorize the questions and come back and study them. And the third time she passed, she was the first Black in her little county to pass that test. And she came in the house and she said, "I am now a first-rate citizen of this country." She was 70 years old, 70 years old. And so I think to myself, how dare I not feel blessed, right? Here and then here. Go ahead.
Here's a hard question.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think that the underrepresentation in the Black PhD is due to the very poor public school preparation?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. This is what we study with the National Academy study. There is no doubt that for all groups, children from economically poor backgrounds are not going to be as well prepared. There's no doubt about that. And it's a challenge, it is. But what we found was that even students who had had decent preparation, AP courses, Black, white, and Asian, that even among that group, students who had 4s and 5s, I wrote the questions for the AB and BC calculus, they're formulaic. You get to real math, real calculus, they're gonna give you 5 problems, 3 you've seen before, 2 you haven't seen before. And so even though you can do the formulaic types, you can still get a D. So what I'm saying is this, there's no doubt we need to strengthen K through 12. But what we found was that the low-hanging fruit when thinking about producing more scientists of color was at the undergraduate level. There are many undergraduates of all races who are fairly well, if not substantially well prepared, who get into classes where it's expected that most people won't make it. Let me give you the proof of this though. And this is liberal arts colleges to research universities. If you look at Dean of Science, you'll appreciate this. If you look at the number in the 2nd year of chemistry compared to the 1st year of chemistry, the numbers are much smaller. In fact, the big problem Mike had in his department at one point was because we had done the chemistry discovery center and redesigned the courses, we had too many people going on. Too many in the sense that we weren't prepared for them. And that's the issue.
I've been to technical school, engineering school here.
Yes, yes.
And the classic speech you get
Yes.
freshman is look
Left and to your right, and one of you and I graduate. Self-fulfilling prophecy. If you look at my 60-minute speech, I say that. We say to students, look at your left, look at your right. Our goal is to make sure all 3 of you graduate, and if you don't, we fail. We fail because we let you in here. You should be able to make it, right? There is not that sense of responsibility that institutions should have. That you're absolutely right. It is still, and let me say this though, the more socially prestigious the university, the greater the probability the student of any race will leave science in the first year or 2. Most of my very prestigious lawyers started out in pre-med. And they got to see, I said that at NIH when I was speaking for all of the institute directors, and Francis allowed me to give us a talk. And I said, you'd be surprised how many really wanted to be physicians. And the top lawyer at NIH at the time, a brilliant woman, came up and she said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I started off in medicine. I got a C in chemistry and I changed my major. And I just didn't tell people, all right? I got an A in English, I didn't tell people. And then a very prestigious college president said, I started off in double E, meaning, right? And I went to single E. She started off in electrical engineering, she went to English. She's a Shakespeare scholar, all right? Nothing wrong with Shakespeare, but she wanted to be an engineer. Near perfect SAT and still got So it's not just people of color who don't make it. So I'm saying it's a cultural issue in our country. You know, if we want to have more, we've got to rethink how we do teaching and learning. Joel? Mhm.
So I'm glad that UMBC also have a significant population of white students. So how do you talk to them, and what do you tell them to convince them
Yes.
that UMBC is the best place for them as well?
Sure. Well, I use Mike Summers. He's my secret weapon often. It's great when you have white faculty who truly believe that diversity is the name of the game. And women, but especially men, because they're more. When I was at Illinois, there was only one in math. There was only one woman professor, faculty member out of 100 faculty in math. She was not tenure track. She had a PhD. All right. And she had a way of looking at me to say, I know what you're going through. She was wonderful that way, right? Why do I tell you that? So what I'm saying is women have always had more of a kind of empathy with people of color. They just do. But there are men who do. We have to find them, identify them, and make them the allies. This is what we do. And my chief ally is in the room right now. But you want white students to see people of all races working together. That's what we love all, and we can work together. And that you are far away when you learn how to work in a group with a diverse group. It really is. So we always, in the Chemistry Discovery Center, we don't allow people to sit with their friends. We assign them randomly. So we'll get Asians and whites and blacks and Latinos, the few Native Americans, all in groups. And I say on campus, it's great to be with your own group sometimes. We love Black student group, Latino group, Filipino group, but I also want them to mix it up. They have to do both. It's very important.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to the screening problem.
Yes. Yes.
And when students get a C or a D
Yes.
in calculus,
Yes.
they immediately get out. But the question is, why is it that high school students going to college get into trouble immediately in mathematics? Is it because they are not trained to be creative enough to think?
There are two issues. There's not enough articulation connecting between universities and high schools. We've been working to do a lot of that. So the standards are different.
Yep.
Even between community colleges and four-year institutions. We had the Gates grant, and we saw that in that second year of chemistry, what they covered in the community college was nothing like what would be expected when they go to the next year. So we had to really work on more cross-fertilization between the two. But the other point is, we often place students who had AP and AB and BC calculus in Cal 3, and they're not really ready for it.
Exactly.
And they end up getting a C. And you get a C, you get discouraged, right? Right? Yeah. Or if you get C's in the first year of all your work and you move on to the next level, your foundation is still weak and you tend not to do as well. So we started working on students repeating some courses, but we also redesigned courses. We have a lot of money we invest in redesign of courses in teaching and learning. But the one thing that Michael Summers taught me in my zeal for having every student get an A in everything, he said, Freeman, it's good to get A's, but not as concerned about the A as I am about the curiosity. The student may get a strong B, but have a curiosity, not just working for the grade, right, and be much better. And it took me a while, and I got that. And so some of my most successful, the woman who created the vaccine, it's wonderful, one A student. She's very curious, and she was solid, right? But she had that curiosity and that passion. And that led to her being successful. Now being at Harvard, it's wonderful. So Michael was right. He was right. Then back here, yes, go ahead.
So I have actually a question and a comment. So you had alluded that some colleges in the second year of their college, they have readouts.
Yes.
And you consider that as a bad thing, right? But some universities consider that as prestige.
That's exactly right.
You know, and
That's
I
exactly
know
right.
from the university I came from, in the
Yes.
Philippines,
Yes.
like in the engineering schools.
Yes.
You
Yes.
get 100 entrants in the College of Engineering.
Yes.
25 in the second year.
Yes.
5 at the end of the 5
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
that
Yes.
wasn't considered, that was a badge of honor.
And that is the old way of looking at it.
And
It's-
would you consider then that the failure is on the part of the faculty?
I would say indeed. We have failed those students, and some of the most prestigious places in our country do exactly that. We say that we should have high standards. Yes, high standards, rigorous standards for the academic quality, but high standards for support. If the student is willing to work hard, we will work with you and help you grasp these
Is
concepts.
that not spoon feeding?
No, absolutely not. You want the student to grasp the concepts. Once the student has a certain background and that student moves ahead, if you get students through the first 2 years of the work with strong Bs, they're on their way. They're on their way. You look at, we use analytics, at every level, and we get students through the strong Bs, they're on their way to last 2 years. As long as the faculty member is reasonable and works with those students, because sometimes the concepts can be very difficult to understand. But when a faculty says, we will work on this, we'll get extra time, we'll get there, right? It doesn't mean everybody's gonna go and get a PhD, but it does mean they can grasp the concept and be able to go on. But there is a mindset that says if most people don't make it, that's high quality. That is so 20th century. It really is. It's a real challenge, and we should be embarrassed. Now, I will tell you with my TED Talk, I get wonderful comments saying you're right, others who are very angry at me, saying, how dare you, because I would say this, if I go to the board and I put a problem up, differential equations, and everybody says, wow, he's really smart, then I can test him. And nobody passes that test. Have I taught it? No. But we tend to think if you put it on the board, we've taught it. No, they didn't grab it. They didn't get it. You just threw that ball and they didn't catch it, right? We've got to rethink what teaching and learning should be. That would be the point. It's very important.
The other comment.
Yes.
Was your comment about the workforce and
Yes.
relaxing the federal workforce.
Yes.
Just to let you know, Marvin and I did an analysis of the NIH intern workforce.
Yes.
And specifically for that. For
Yeah,
basic
yeah,
custody, et
Yeah,
cetera.
yeah.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but if you're interested, it's in the biennial report.
Oh, I
which will
looked
be
at it.
submitted to Congress.
Listen.
You can see the actual numbers.
I know, and I know that, and I've talked to Francis about it and Fauci about it and others that I'm saying we should be better than this, especially as national agencies. If we're trying to get universities to become more diverse, our national agencies have to do it also. And the other challenge is that students, Filipinos and Blacks, will get PhDs and they don't have anybody to coach them to get them to go into the research. And because they speak well, they'll get an administrative job, and that's okay. But we need more people doing the science. We need more people in the research. And that's what we're trying to do, to find ways of having people who support new PhDs of color to keep them from being discouraged and just going and getting a job. Because we need,
There should be accountability.
there should be, there really should. I know he said, I got it. Last question, I'm sorry. Yes, Mike.
Well, the last comment there is interesting.
Yes.
What we're also seeing across every group,
Yes,
whites,
Yes.
black, is that they come into the PhD, they're wanting to do research. And at the end of the pipeline, a huge fraction of them
Yeah.
are leaving research.
yes,
They
yes,
still are in science and they want to go
Yes,
to policy,
policy,
and
yes.
in communication is
yes,
popular.
yes.
And how to continue to
Yes.
get them in the research enterprise.
It's so important. And that's going to take a deliberate and proactive approach on the part of faculty and universities to keep them having that vision. And what I keep saying is, they call me from around the country, I'm saying, well, do you see anybody else in the faculty looking like you? Anybody? No. All right. Well, if not you, who? You got to keep saying that to people. The dean of in medicine, Sandy Williams at Duke years ago said, Freeman, come down and talk to my departments, because I have it's under 1% Black faculty. He said, help me. He said, your kids who are coming here doing well, but they want to go out, even when they have PhDs, to the clinical side. So he worked with me 15 years ago. We now have 4 Blacks tenured there at Duke, MD PhDs. 3 MD PhDs, 1 MDJ, because of that leadership. And here was the deal with the MD PhD. The PhD scientists would say, if you're going to be a real scientist, you don't have so much time for the clinical. And the people on the MD side would say, if you're going to be a real doctor, you don't have a lot of time for this other stuff. And they were just being pulled. But it took Sandy, who was over everybody, to say, no, you're going to give them the time to get. So final point. So one of the kids whose parents are from Ghana, grew up in DC, Kafri Zarasa, became the young investigator neuroscientist for the world from the Neuroscience Society 2 years ago. He's invented a pacemaker for the brain to address schizophrenia. Now that's science. All right. Thank you all very much. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, you started our night with evening with fire alarms and fire traps.
Right.
Let's just see your ideas on fire.
And I want you to solve that math problem too. It's a 6th grade problem, but even PhDs have it. And your first answer is wrong. So keep thinking about it.
Okay, so before we move on, I'd like to again call on Dr. Abowski and Dr. Marge Peña she's the chairperson of our board of directors to represent Dr. Gisela Concepcion to give us a small token for
Very nice.
of appreciation.
Very nice.
So this is, remember, it's not just the fire department. This will solidify that. Okay, plaque of appreciation awarded to Freeman A. Rabowski III, PhD, President, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, for sharing his invaluable knowledge as keynote speaker at the 41st Annual Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering Meeting and Symposium, Baltimore, Maryland, October 9, 2021.
Thank you very much. In the spirit of cold. This is in honor of Bino Cole. This is my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The next part of our program is supposed to be the panel discussion, but we'll just insert, a 5-minute introduction of our APAMS 2021 fellows through photos. So the 2021 APAMS fellowship program was organized through the initiative of our president, Dr. Concepcion, and we gave the graduate students free access to our conference. They also would be part of the directory of graduate students who will get the first shot at opportunities in postdoc or research training opportunities, coming from different places. And I'd like to tell you that we actually received at least 2 inquiries, from people who heard about the fellowship, and they sent us materials, somehow recruiting or students to apply for this research opportunity. So these are our APAMS 2021 graduate student fellows. Will be fast. Von Calvin Aguilar, UST, University of Santo Tomas. Alonte at Allen Jethro, UP Los Baños. Shireen Antoinette A. Antonio, UP Diliman. Gemeline Grace Valdissimo, Old Dominion University. By the way, most of them are listening to us, on Zoom. Jude Martin A. Banzuela, UP Los Baños. Brian Bautista, De La Salle University. Sam Dominic A. Binag, University of Santo Tomas. Clint Charles Perez, UP Los Baños. Maurelio Cabo Jr., Changwon National University. Kim Shi A. Caringal, UP Los Baños. Juvenil Echon Cartel, De La Salle University, Manila. Katrina Joy T. Castillo, UP Los Baños. Phil Cruz Jr., De La Salle University. Yoquimico David, De La Salle University. Marian Del Barrio, UP Los Baños. Maria Lourdes Peggy, Del Mundo, UP Los Baños. Paul Emmanuel de la Rosa, University of Rizal System. Carlito Di Maano, University of Santo Tomas. Justin Perry Domingo, University of Edinburgh. Ziz Seligman Elumba, UP Los Baños. June Chris Espia, University of Canterbury. Jan de Guzman Eustaquio, who's our main tech person here. Marlo and Fabia, UP Los Baños. Ray Angelo Frias, De La Salle University, Manila. Sergi S. Garbanzos, De La Salle University. Marvin J. G. Henogin, De La Salle University. Zanil Gomez, UP Los Baños. Earl Gerald Gregorio, De La Salle University. Juen Rica Hernandez, UP Los Baños. Xander Carl Herrera, UP Los Baños. Noel Andrew Ipora, Florida International University. Kevin Lagman, University of Santo Tomas. Jeremy J.B. McDowell, De La Salle University. Presi Bison Mactoto, UP Los Baños. I would like to invite Dr. Alvin Culaba to read the next set. Dr. Culaba.
George
Is he on?
from University of Philippines.
Okay, I'll just continue. George Ringo S. Manapat, UP Diliman. Christia Jane Mancera, University of Santo Tomas. Pauline Jane Mandrilla, University of Santo Tomas. Cheryl May Mariano, UP Diliman. Gerald Santos Mascardo, University of Santo Tomas. Andres Philip Mayol, De La Salle University. Maria Victoria Migos Sumaga, De La Salle University. Senor Rino Danao Montales, New Era University. Arceli Perez Napalit, Technological Institute of the Philippines. J. Manzano Navaluna, De La Salle University. Marian Hannah Nguyen, University of Southern Queensland. Jonas Padilla, Louisiana State University. Julian Eris Parañaque, UP Los Baños. Robert James A. Palomino, University of Santo Tomas. Mark Louis Ramos, UMBC. Graduating soon. Piper Cruz Vehencia, UP Manila. Patricia Revilla, UP Los Baños. Patrick Reyes, UP Diliman. Anne Elizabeth P. Rolion Innova, UP Diliman. Alex Bautista Runas, University of Santo Tomas. Aimee Saladaga, Eastern Visayas State University. Abdul Rashid Sampaco, UP Diliman. Jane Lois San Juan, De La Salle University. Rodolfo Soto Jr., UPLB. Ronel Tan, University of Santo Tomas. Angelico Nicole Tolentino, University of Santo Tomas. Mayan Tolentino, University of Rizal System. Charleston Torres, University of Santo Tomas. Denzel Keith Orieta, De La Salle University. Emil Valderrama, UP Los Baños. Manly Valera Jr., University of Santo Tomas. Enrique Villones, University of Rizal System. Carlo Lorenzo Binoya, De La Salle University. John Whalen, Old Dominion University. Stephanie Jubilia Britannia, UP Los Baños. Jeb Reese Gravato, UP Los Baños. And last but not the least is Cynthia Garcia Idol, University of Illinois at Chicago. So these are our first cohort of because we want them to be visible to us. You know, they're the backbone of our labs. They're the ones working, and so we would like to welcome them. So now we are on to the next major part of our session. That will be our panel on science and diversity. And I would like to introduce our first speaker. You know, at one point during last year, I think, when we were receiving materials from people around the country about diversity, we were sent an article written by our next speaker. And we had like probably 2 or 3 weeks of discussion about his ideas. And so let me introduce him. Noel Andre Porak is an advanced PhD student at Florida International University, biology doctoral program. He obtained his BA in biology from California State University, San Bernardino. Upon transitioning to FIU, he joined the Marine Macrosystem Research Lab with Dr. Lydia Collado Vides in 2016. His dissertation focuses on marine plant-animal interactions and strives to understand the characteristics of macroalgae and invertebrates that drive these interspecies interactions. Ladies and gentlemen, scientists and mathematicians and engineers, please welcome Mr. Rolo Porra.
Thank you, Mario, for and thank you, Pase, for funding me and inviting me to this talk. I do want to give a shout out to Dr. Freeman. Oh my God,
Podolsky.
Yeah, because he definitely touched on some things, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to top that? And with all the presentations that have been done so far, it's very science driven, and I'm thinking, wow. And I think on top of that, well, my presentation is going to be a lot different because diversity and inclusion as an early career scientist definitely touch on a very personal level, and you're going to see a lot of personal stuff. But I put some data in there just to be scientific and all the good stuff. So there's going to be that strong interaction in the context of crossroads and shifting baselines. Now, I would definitely want to give some context on what we mean by shifting baseline. So of course, I am a marine ecologist by training and profession. And what we love to do as ecologists is to collect data. We love to collect data on our ecosystems and come up with ideas on how our ecosystem works and what are ways to conserve it. So these are just stock photo examples of scientists looking at the coral reef ecosystems. And this paper by Bumby and Stenek, what they did is they talked about how our perceptions of these coral reef ecosystems changed over time. Once upon a time, we thought these were homogeneous systems and they're pretty robust, all odds given. But just showing some Caribbean examples here, there are triggers, stressors, factors that cause this decline of coral reef carbon, and later realized, oh my gosh, these are diverse and these are super fragile ecosystems. And this is reflected on what I see for diversity inclusion, because at least from a very personal level, I see how my ideas of what diversity, inclusion, and if we're going to add on equity and justice, is going to look, because there are programs that are starting to incorporate that stuff now, has changed from when I was very young as an undergraduate student all the way till now, hopefully graduating next year. And so I want to give a quick overview of what does my shifting baseline look like. Of course, my baseline is going to be different from yours. Here's what I roughly look like. In that when I was young, being able to try to do science, I need to work hard to have a place in science. We call it the table. The table is where experts kind of come together and talk about what needs to be done in science, what needs to be done with policy, communication, etc. And then over time, I have an idea that representation matters. But then as I was going on to my university, I learned that there are other factors that we definitely have to consider. Not just mere representation, but other needs to make sure that the science that we're doing serves the people both inside and outside of our institutions. I do want to give some quick caveats. Of course, these perspectives and ideas are my own. My ideas and goals have changed over time, and I'm going to will the bit after I talk to some of you. It's never going to change again. Gradually shifted from the individual importance to the systemic importance, and I am still learning. You're going to see on the bottom left corner that there's this line with the orange dots, and just to give some perspective, throughout the presentation, you're going to see that orange dot move from left to right, just to give a visual on how my baseline has changed over time. So I want to give some context of where I come from. I come from San Bernardino, California, and even though California is next to the ocean, I actually live on the drier, hotter area of Cali. I am a U.S. child of Filipino immigrant parents. I am a Filipino American. I've rarely stepped foot into the Philippines. Last time it was when I graduated high school. Even though I come from a lower middle class background, San Bernardino is largely on income. If you look at the news articles of San Bernardino, it is one of the most poverty-stricken cities in the U.S., one of the most crime-ridden. 6 years ago, it was the site of a mass shooting. Wonderful. And with all these different factors, and top of being a first-generation person, I'm very sheltered. I have no idea that science can be a career, let alone Filipino and other represented minority scientists actually existing. And then when I started forming my baseline when I was in my undergraduate, it provided a space for me to explore both my Filipino identity and my curiosity with the natural world. I love the outdoors, I love adventure, I love going out. I had the opportunity to work with some very fantastic mentors. Dr. Sylvia Yang and David Scholl in Washington State. Their research on eelgrass has provided me the basis of becoming a marine biologist that I would never gotten. And then coming back to my home university at Cal State San Bernardino, John Skillman, even though he was a white man, he made strides to make sure that I felt belonged at his lab. And on top of that, being involved in clubs such as my Filipino club, being involved with the Dreamers, who are undocumented students, and sharing ideas, perspectives, and stories, as well as reading media like Dr. Anthony Ocampo's book, The Latinos of Asia, How Filipino Americans Break the Rules of Race. Even though it may not be a perfect critique, I can't deny that a media like this has helped me shape my ideas and context on what it means to be Filipino American. But the important thing is, my identity and development of being Filipino American as scientists remained really separate. And then I had my first trigger. I had my first shift in baseline when I moved to over 2,000 miles to Florida. It is a change of environment and culture. Not just in the ecosystem sense, but also social, political, and cultural landscapes, very, very different from California scene. And once again, I'm very, very fortunate. I can't stress the importance of mentors enough. Dr. Lee Hyoko Aldevides and Dr. Alain Duran, who, he was still a grad student back then. These were some very important mentors, along with the cadre of mostly undergraduate students who helped me feel belonged in their lab as being at least one of the 2 graduate students in that lab at that time. But despite this, I still felt very isolated, because this was the first time I realized, holy crap, I am a Filipino scientist. This is the first time where my 2 identities have intersected with this major culture shock. And then this frustration and this isolation led me to write, and it led me to connect with other folks of different backgrounds. And this is, unfortunately, this article is not available anymore because Google lost their domain. I guess they haven't paid, but I do have the PDF. I know. But at that time, I was very interested in, why are there so few Filipinos? What does, where do Filipinos that are interested in STEM going? And of course, I can't say I'm a huge expert on this. I mainly look through publicly available data. I come from a California State University system. So I looked at CSU census data, and I looked at, really briefly, this is data from 2016 to 2017 about the number of Filipino graduate degrees awarded. You can see that this big blue piece of pie right here are all professions of nursing. And engineering has some nice representation, but everything else looks like very tiny pieces of pizza pie. And if you're wondering, I decided to look at what happened this year. I'm not going to run a statistical test. I don't think anything changed. I'm showing data here that's publicly available. And by all means, feel free to critique this stuff and feel free to critique my interpretation of it. But what's really important is I have to stretch out of my way. I not only looking at science, but also looking at history and other fields on why I may be, seeing this kind of pattern right here. I mean, at a young age, my parents think I'm smart and yada yada. They think, oh, you could be a really nice nurse or medical doctor. I don't know how many folks here have been told that at a very young age, but there's definitely a lot of history with Filipino overseas workers, labor export policy, and how nursing is definitely one of the major professions to be exported from Philippines overseas. The important thing is, as an ecologist, oh my God, I don't even know where ecology is. If I left on the side, this is gray a piece of slice right here. My isolation is not unique. I'm pretty sure that there are other Filipinos who probably felt the same way. I don't know about now, but maybe at least in the undergrad stage, and forming connections between the individual and systemic level, which is through my need to reach out to look at history, politics, and et cetera, and forming connections between what I saw in the data and the personal. May not be a one size fits all, but for me, that's pretty much how I roll with these kinds of topics. And because of starting to develop that consciousness, I wanted to be involved more. Gonna jump a little bit here. I know that this article had made its way around Pasay, but for me to write this article, I started getting involved with other clubs and organizations within my university in light of the 2020 George Floyd uprisings that happened last year, which started bringing the importance of systemic racism and the need to acknowledge and combat it to the front. Some folks of our biology department picked up this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by APAMS Kendi, who acknowledged that racism is a systemic problem and is often guided not by individual choices, but by policy and practice. And being involved in the diversity communities within my academic program. At one point, I was actually acknowledged as student of the year with this stuff, as well as getting involved outside of my university. Before I even realized the posse existed, there was another much younger Filipino scientist club called the Association of Filipino Scientists in America, which I am heavily involved in and will be involved for years to come. The development of this article, I think, stems from a combination of all these different factors, ranging from the George Floyd uprisings to the anti-Asian racist crimes that happened during the onset of the pandemic. And so once again, this is where I started to get a little shaky, because I know that as very naive early career scientists, I looked at NSF data. And at least this is the point of status of scientists and engineers by ethnicity and race. One of the arguments that I've definitely made is that Asian Americans are considered the overrepresented minority. Like, this is taken like copy and paste straight from the NSF report. And Asians are considered in this key slide right here. If you kind of ignore this very large green bar representing white people, Asians are considered the second largest group. But then I bring in the problem, I think Dr. Freeman explained this much better than I have, is the need for specificity. The Asians are definitely not a monolith. You definitely have Asian, racial, and ethnic groups, and you combine that with socioeconomic class. And so I don't think I need to beat the dead horse on this in this need to be more targeted specific. I'm going to take a little further and say that this is extended through field as well. This is another article published before mine by Gishpret, who published this in the Bulletin of the Ecological Society of America. She found that the Asian population is increasing, but at the same time, the ecology PhD is going down within the last decade. And so I bring this up because even though we are early career scientists, I've never worked at NSF, so I can't say what are the inner workings on how they operate. But we are with the peer-reviewed publication, not including oral conversations, we are starting to have these very difficult conversations. And at that time, being involved in my diversity committee, by addressing problems within our institutions that are reflective, that are a mesocosm of society. Because remember, when we graduate with our PhDs or masters or what have you, we're going to be leaders in academia and industry, nonprofit, and so on and so forth. We can be able to work within our workspaces and institutions to solve these problems. And this has been my way of thinking. That was my current baseline, especially working with these diversity, equity, inclusion committees for 18 months. And then I resigned. I resigned from all of my DEI committee positions. And I'm not going to get into the specificities and details of why, but if I have to whittle it down, it boiled down to the fact that it's a very slow process. There is a lot of performativity and hesitancy on taking these really bold positions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this need to not only have symbolic representation, but also have material support. And so what do I mean by that? I'm going to show examples. Once again, you got to think in mind that with the little scientists that we have, who went through their education, the leaky pipeline is a problem. What I was about to say here, whatever few scientists are going to be named, more so with underrepresented groups, they're going to be leaders of society. And I'm using my university example, but I think can also be reflected on academia as a whole. So FIU has been making strides to, increase their diversity and inclusion efforts. They hired a new diversity chair who released their equity action initiative last year, and there were town halls. Our anti-racist book club kind of looked at it and definitely questioned some things, but because we're busy, we never had the time to actively go to those town halls. But for a Hispanic serving institution like FIU, why, for example, are we making strides to, have diversity, inclusion, and representation at the same time? Graduate students from those diverse backgrounds who are the backbone of research are struggling to make ends meet on one of the most expensive cities in the nation. And we've got to keep in mind that, once again, these are going to be leaders of society, and there's going to be no shortage of crazy societal problems locally, regionally, and globally. Reckoning as an ecologist, taking an occupation within a country that is built on genocide of indigenous groups and enslavement of Black people, among others, we have to be I ended up being very conscious, not of just systemic racism, but also other systemic problems like capitalism, colonialism, imperialism. The list can go on and on. And so how does the university react to local issues such as the land back movement, Cuba, who is working hard to provide medical supplies while still navigating a 60-year embargo, and the Israeli apartheid of Palestine. And the way that the university reacts to the messages that it sends, I question if we rely on institutions alone, if there are going to be providing the right answers for these very complex problems. And I know I'm going to run out of time. And I think the panel, I'll talk a little bit about solutions. I'm willing to, have these conversations. But I think we need to have a very multifaceted approach at an individual level, educating ourselves, and not just relying on institutions, even though institutional solutions and plans are very important, but also working outside of our institutions into our communities. We need to be talking to people because now I went from, I need to work hard to get it to the table, and questioning, why is there even a table for something as public as accessible as science in the first place? And so this action and reflection praxis, as Paulo Freire has described it, is very essential for my development as a scientist. I study the seaweed sargassum, which is a problem in the Caribbean. And a lot of these Caribbean countries have histories of colonialism, imperialism that are not very different from our own. And for me to continue doing this international research, it is required of me to be conscious of colonialism and imperialism, among others. And we have to be educating ourselves to these ideas and concepts that are a lot of times very outside our field. And, as we go through this panel, I'm really interested in talking. I think PASE and other Filipino scientists clubs are in a unique position to take these things. And I definitely wouldn't have it done without the support from the lab and the book club and AFSA and Troika classes and many other individual and collective groups. And I definitely better stop rambling. But thank you for taking the time and buckling up for these next 15 minutes. Thank you.
And we are happy that even if we have only one graduate student in this room, it's loyalty for us. Yes. And now our second speaker is a member of our hardworking APAMS technical team. Maureen Tubilia just actually moved to Maryland to work at NIH. She earned her BS chemistry degree from the University of San Carlos in Cebu, magna cum laude. Her master's degree from the Texas A&M University. Her PhD in chemistry from Purdue University. She now works as a career scientist at the Office of Research on Women's Health at the National Institutes of Health. Please welcome Maureen.
Good morning to our on-site and good morning or good evening to our on-site virtual participants. I'm a little nervous. I haven't had a presentation in over a year because of the pandemic. So for my presentation today, I'll be talking about the STEM engagement of Southeast Asian transnational youth in the United States. So
So this work is based on my dissertation work at Purdue University entitled Multimodal Analysis of Minoritized Learner Science Engagement in an After-School Science Program. So let me first give a brief context as to the participants of my work. The minoritized learners that I work with. By minoritized learners, I refer to learners who identify as being part of non-dominant communities based on language, race, class, disability. So I emphasize here the difference between minoritized as a process versus minority as a noun. Minoritization is a process brought about by structural and institutional actions towards learners labeled as racially, linguistically, and ethnically different from the norm. The difference is important because minority is a misnomer. You can be numerous in numbers, but yet still lack power. And I wanted to bring attention to the idea that minoritization is not an inherent characteristic. So it is done to you by the system. So this work, okay. This work is important to me, especially given that Filipinos in STEM are underrepresented, especially in the realm of science. And as a Filipino scientist, I am part of that. Here is a science article from 2001, and it cautions us against subscribing to the model minority myth, the idea that Asians are doing fairly well. We need to be asking ourselves, who exactly is being overrepresented? Because under that white Asian umbrella, certain groups continue to be minoritized, excluded, and discriminated against. So here is now a study that just came out this year. And this study clearly shows that Filipino, Vietnamese, and Thai students are invisible in STEM. There has to be ways we can navigate this STEM inequality. So now let me shift gears to talk about the participants of my study. So the learners I work with for my dissertation are the Chin youth from Myanmar or Burma, a Southeast Asian country colonized by the British Empire for 124 years. When the British Empire gave up control over Burma, the Chins declared their independence and established a democratic government. However, it was short-lived with the onset of the military rule in Burma. Because of abuses by the Burmese army, many Chins are living as refugees in India, Malaysia, and scattered in North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. So, but majority of the Chins are Christians in a predominantly Buddhist nation. The Chins are considered a double minority, and they are persecuted also due to their identity as Chins and as Christians. So may I now direct your attention to the table, oh, so tiny, showing the total number of refugees. And note that refugees from Myanmar constitute the majority of refugees admitted in the US. I think for the total 2010 to 2020, they constitute 20.8%. And also just a little bit of trivia, actually this year, the admittance of refugees has dropped to about 60%. And I think this is actually an equity issue, but I don't want to get into that for now. But as resettled refugee youth in the US, they remain minorities due to their status as refugees and as racial, ethnic, and linguistic minorities and English language learners. And the science learners, their contributions are often rendered invisible. But that is only part of the story. So, oops, little script. To put in a wider context, changing migration pattern has reshaped the educational landscape. When before we only needed to be concerned about diversity, K-12 classrooms in the US are now becoming super diverse. And what do we mean by super diverse? We mean that now there's a diversity of diversity. It's not just racial or ethnic. It's linguistic, it's socioeconomic, it's religion, it's class, it's a lot of things. So these two images actually show the diversity index of the United States for the census data. And notice that the trend shows that over time, we really are moving towards an era of super diversity. Super diversity is inevitably the new norm. Forecasts show that immigration will account for 88% of US population growth through 2065. And along with the racial and ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity is also inevitable. This shift to super diverse learning contexts require a reevaluation of how we educate our learners. However, current US education system still has ways to go in adjusting to the new mainstream of super diversity. Currently, K through 12 education is still traditionally white, middle class, and English monolinguistic. And what does that mean? It means that when we see these multilingual learners, these English language learners, we see them like as having deficits. We should actually see that as having assets. Linguistic capital is something that they could leverage on. So, for example, in science, US science classrooms, science engagement remains perceived as a linguistic accomplishment. What does this mean? This means that science engagement is still equated to English language proficiency, and educators continue to mainly assess learners in how well they're able to write and speak. This puts English language learners at a disadvantage. But is that right? So in this work, I posit that language is not the end all and be all of sense making. Instead, I argue that all the modes, which are the various ways through which we communicate, are essential to our meaning making and engagement, and thus warrants a closer inspection. Human beings, after all, communicate via multimodal ways, and not only through speech and writing alone. This is especially important for multilinguals or learners to speak more than a language. So once again, I really am advocating that multilinguality is not a deficit, it is an asset, and we need to celebrate that. So in this work, I operationalize science engagement in alignment with Engel and Conant's work, wherein learners' engagement is not only assessed solely through their verbal participation, but rather through the relevant contributions that they make, the way they stay on task, on activities, and how they coordinate with their peers. And since all of these things are manifested multimodally, I forward a multimodal lens to explore science engagement. So multimodality draws from a social-cultural view of learning and views interactions as an interplay of various communicative modes such as speech, image, gesture, gaze, posture. Hence, by drawing to aspects beyond language, we can capture learning aspects that may go unnoticed. And in doing so, we challenge the perspective that science learning is primarily a linguistic accomplishment. Thus, in brief, what I did was I analyzed interactions to understand how learners engaged in science learning. The work I did was set in an after-school program with resettled Burmese refugee youth. So the after-school program did not have the constraints of formal schooling. And we forwarded this approach because informal settings play a key role in the science and engagement of minoritized learners in general and in refugee youth in particular. There have been studies that show that it actually increased how they achieved in science and how, like we were talking about curiosity. So it encouraged that. So what we did was that we designed an after-school program that met for 90 minutes per week, where learners engage in topics of weather, climate, and climate change. And we did this really because these youth are transnationals and they've lived in multiple countries. And really the appreciation that because you've lived in different countries, different places, you have this embodied knowledge of knowing what weather is like in those countries. That is something that was quite a culture shock for me actually when I first moved here. It's like, why do they talk about weather all the time? It's like, you know, in the Philippines, we have to get regular 12 hours of sunlight, and like my only conception of humidity before I actually associated it with temperature. But like after experiencing it in a different place, I was like, okay, this is humidity. So sorry, I digress. But so I collected a whole range of data. So the refugee youth that I work with had varying degrees of English proficiency, and they're multilingual. And when I say multilingual, they didn't just speak Burmese and English. They spoke a multitude of Chin languages, just how as Filipinos, we speak a multitude of languages. And of course, they've experienced interruption in their formal schooling. So my approach to data collection was microethnography. So basically, I spent so much time with these learners to understand what the setting was like. And I collected tons and tons of video recordings, screencasts, which is basically capturing what learners are seeing on their screens, audio recordings, field notes, the artifacts that the learners made, like with their posters and their PowerPoint presentations and interviews. So my whole idea of doing this is to kind of understand how they use these multimodal resources to kind of forward their science thinking and kind of understand how else can we redesign the classroom space to kind of encourage that. So just a summary of the gazillion data that I had to collect. So I'm just going to show, I guess these are like my general findings overall, a little taste of the general findings that I had. So one of the things that I looked at was looked at proxemics, which is kind of like how distant you are to one another, gestures, posture, and gaze. And we noticed that coordination of space allows for collaborative work, whereas the coordination of posture, gestures, and gaze facilitate continued engagement. So when you're able to actually coordinate space appropriately, that fosters equity and opportunities. So supposing you are all crowded and then, like, for example, you're just sharing like a poster paper, whoever gets access to that is the one who is most engaged. And so, I mean, like that kind of like is pragmatic in a sense. So when we take note of those things, then we are able to better design learning spaces. So I give more detail to the second example. So the second example is in the context of a whole class discussion where learners were asked to describe various words about weather. So one facilitator asked the learners whether they know the word muggy. So here we show a few moments regarding their attempts to define the word muggy. So here theory attempts to sound out whether muggy is a combination of foggy and mud. Holding two fingers, she attempts to combine two ideas that at first glance appear to be incompatible. We argue this attempt was generative in the sense it opened up opportunities for other learners to take risks and share ideas, though they may be uncertain. But this was only fostered because of the relaxed atmosphere in the group. As you can see, everyone is on the floor and there's laughter and joking is encouraged, or at least taken up by the group. So attempting the uncertain is fostered in the setting. And here are other attempts where they tried to define muggy. Here, Maya tries gooey. So she tries to, like, is it gooey? With gestures of her hands as well as wiggling of her body to demonstrate the sensation of gooey. And then here's another attempt. So Maya tries to use a more relatable, maybe easier word, stickier, along with gestures as if she's coating her arms with something. Here she uses everyday language along with gestures. And finally, Sandy, the one beside her, gives the example of a bus. Arguably, most of the learners here have had experience riding a bus. So right beside Sandy, Maya is gesturing how moisture streams down her face. And although this is directed to Sandy, in this interaction, other learners who are tuned in towards Maya are arguably able to make connection between muggy and sticky and humidity. So multilingual learners engage in wordplay that allowed for uncertainty and taking risks. Gestures and use of everyday language paved the way for better sense making and was generative in the collective sense making. So here's another example in the context of online research, wherein learners are trying to answer weather-related questions. So I only shared few snippets from a more extended transcript. So Betty is researching about what global warming is, but is having difficulty accessing the text as seen by her struggle in reading it. So when a facilitator asks Betty to explain her understanding of the text, she switches to images and she struggles to articulate and uses gestures. So then here's what Betty does. She tried to persist answering the question and shift from text to images and finally deciding on an image which she finds most accessible. And then finally articulating it to the coordinator. I wanted to kind of draw your attention with the use of images because this is something that we would not have thought that learners would do. But this is what English language learners actually do. This is one way they're using their multimodality. So here we showed that this was a successful attempt of a learner to demonstrate her science knowledge by transforming science ideas, in this case, global warming, conveyed in language and images, to back to language and to gestures. I wish I could share the audio of this.
Can we look the pictures? I still don't get it. I mean, like, I'm kind of confused. I mean, smoke and fog. Smoke and fog. How is it different between smoke and fog? Smog. Smog is
This is the
smoke is poison cloud. Poison cloud. Okay. Smoke is like it's a by car, right? Yeah. Thing. But this is natural. Fog is natural. It's like water.
This is beautiful.
Okay.
No, it is not
Rivers.
exactly water.
Water, but
It contains water, but not exactly water. But it is a cloud on the ground.
cloud on the ground. Cloud in the ground.
That's how they define it. Yeah. But
Cloud, where are you?
but cloud contain a water.
Okay, cloud in the ground. Let's do it.
It benefits people for sure, except when traveling too fast.
So in this moment, I note that the focal group had already spent time discussing the reading, but Vincent raises the idea that we need to look at images to differentiate between smog and fog. And so in this interaction, they affirm and disaffirm ideas while bringing in laughter and comical gestures that makes their sharing of ideas more comfortable. So finally, what insights can we glean from multimodal analysis of youth interactions? I wanted to really advocate that talk-based approaches are limited in understanding learner sense-making and science engagement. Multimodality expands our understanding of learners' contributions. And so multiplicity of modes, like all of the modes combined together, is critical to interpreting learners' intended meaning. Sometimes we may think, oh, learners they don't know anything. But really the onus is on us if like we're educators to kind of like push ourselves a little bit further to really try and understand. So educators should be mindful of how various modes could influence the negotiations of membership in a group, task roles, and that cognitive authority, like who gets to be believed when sharing ideas. Awareness of how students utilize various multimodal practices in their science learning and participation may help educators better structure learning tasks and encourage positive group dynamics. I really wanted to draw more implications for like more pragmatic implications. And so kind of what I was thinking is that paying close attention to the ecology of interaction that goes beyond spoken language, noticing gestures, since we could infer through gestures which one dominates in the group. Arrangement of material resources I mentioned earlier, since participants manipulate space and materials to negotiate participation and contribute to tasks. And encouraging minoritized youth to participate more. We need to be aware of the barriers to their participation so we can better structure our learning tasks. A lot of the learners that I talk to really like feel like, oh, they know they have science ideas, but they hesitate because they feel they're not as articulate in English. And I think we're doing our students a disservice if we let that happen. So that said, we note things that really encourage collaboration. I really strongly recommend that. And kind of like, these are my moonshot asks. We really need more disaggregated data. And we really need to reframe how we're teaching, and we need to build learning ecosystems. So, oops. I want to acknowledge the funding for allowing me to do this work. And for that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kabila. I'm now encouraged or motivated to read her dissertation. It's so fascinating, you know. A scientific work like this is so fascinating. So you can see, Mabing, how I use gestures and space to signify, you know, time. So now I would like to call on Dr. Senya Tigno, who will be our next speaker. Dr. Tigno is the Associate Director of Careers at the Office of Research on Women's Health at the National Institute of Health. She's a high-ranking officer at NIH. She earned her PhD from Germany, magna cum laude. Because you see how the similarity between the boss and the associate. And at one time, she was the only non-medical doctor who was teaching at the College of Medicine of the University of the Philippines in UP Manila. So now she just actually released a co-edited book on gender-based physiology and lung diseases. And so I'd like to call on Dr. Senya Tigno to give her presentation.
Thank you very much, Mario, for that introduction. I need to use this.
Yeah, you can. It doesn't.
Okay, so this talk was actually triggered by the fact that Mario and I had an advocacy, which was actually to bring to the forefront the fact that Filipinos are underrepresented in the STEM fields. And it seems that everybody was blind to that idea. And I said, Mario, in order to make the case, we need a lot of data. And so originally, my original idea, so first my disclaimer, because I'm a the government employee, this does not reflect the opinions of the Office of Research on Women's Health, the NIH, or the federal government. My original intention was to give a portrait of the scientists as Filipino, where we are, where do we want to be, and how to get there. But after trying diligently to look for data, with the help of Mario and some of our friends elsewhere, I thought I need to reframe this thing because I don't have the data. And so I'm just going to look at the labor force by race, ethnicity, and sex and see where the Filipina or the Filipinos even fit there. So I would like to do a sort of an overview of the workforce with a deeper dive on the fraction that consists of STEM, the racial and ethnic diversity of the STEM workforce, and the representation of the Filipinos there, if that data is present, the representation of women, because remember, I am an advocate for gender equity, especially in the STEM workforce, and the representation of the Filipina women in the STEM workforce. So this is data which, thanks for having a wonderful associate like Marvin, we get the data in leaps and bounds from every other possible source. And so I had to revise this talk several times because, there's new data, okay. So this data includes workers from 16 to 75 years old and excludes those in the military occupations. And you see that the non-STEM workforce is like 119,000 versus 36,000 in STEM. But in recent years, we have some kind of SME-related workforce. They don't have a bachelor's degree in STEM, but still they need some kind of STEM background in order to perform their work. And so, again, this is the data which was from the census data, the American Community Survey 2019, released in 2020. Next one, please. So the labor force, you are going to see it by race, ethnicity, etc. You have participation of Asians with 64% versus whites, which is 63%, which makes Asians, and as we know, Filipinos are considered Asians, are some of the most employed and participatory workforce in the labor market. But among the Asians, Indians were 24%, Chinese 22%, and Filipinos 14%. And among Filipinos, 25 years and older, the share of the labor force, as you can see there, 65% of Asians in the labor force had a bachelor's degree and higher, versus whites, 41%, blacks, 32%, and Hispanic, 22%. Next one, please. And employed people by occupation, race, and ethnicity, this is 2019 data. The annual averages, I think, will also show this. You can see that 55% of employed Asians and what kind of professions they were in was mostly management, professional, and related occupations versus 51% in whites, and 57% of these were Asian men, and 53% Asian women were engaged as such. Next one, please. So this gives you an idea why they say that the Asians are, kind of having it good. Now, bachelor's degree in science and engineering by race, as you can see there, the green bar is the white people, yellow is the Asian, and again, next to the whites, Asians seem to be doing well as far as science and engineering are concerned. So here is the science and engineering degrees by underrepresented minority men and women as a percentage of all the S&P degrees awarded based on data from 2008 to 2018. So let us just look at the doctoral degrees because, we here in PAASE always are concerned with those who are supposed to be the scientists, those with the doctoral degrees. So doctorate for women is the darker blue. The lighter blue is doctorate in men. Among URMs, you can see that more doctoral degrees are actually earned by women. But recall, URMs does not include the Philippines. So civilian labor force by sex from 1948 to 2016. And you can see that there is now a steady increase in women in the workforce, and the gap between the two, as far as the employment percentages are concerned, is narrowing. But of those working in STEM, only 27% are women. And if you look at them, where are they? So for instance, in this bar here, you have social scientists as red. Most of the women are actually in social science. By the way, they're considered scientists too, even though most of the people here are physical scientists or medical scientists. Math occupations, 47%. Life and physical sciences, 47%. And computers, where a lot of the jobs are now, they're only 27% women. So I make the case for women, okay? More men than women were employed full-time in 2019. This is pre-pandemic. And about twice as many women were employed part-time. So the part-time employment is the yellow-green bar, and the light blue is full-time employed. And as you can see, women are not as, the proportion of women employed is less than those men employed full-time, but they are more than about twice as much employed part-time. And the reason for their being on partial employment is mainly family responsibilities. Next one, please. And again, this is from the NSF data. Doctoral scientists and engineers employed in universities and four-year colleges. Again, teaching faculty, primarily men. And as you go even further up to the president, you can see that throughout academia, women are always underrepresented relative to men. Men dominate the academia. Next one, please. And if you look at tenure track faculty, again, the same thing holds. Full professor, 51% men, 34% women. So the gender gap in SNE is presented as such. This is 2017 data. I'm sorry, I could not find something newer than that. White men, 49%, white women, 18%, followed by Asian men, 14%, and Asian women, 7%. So part of that Asian women may be some Filipinos, but we don't really know how much. Next one, please. So there's also a gender gap in the technical workforce. So people working in technical industries. As you can see, part of this is from Amazon.com jobs extracted from it. And again, employees in technical roles are predominantly men. Next one, please. National lab leadership, lab directors, 86% are white men. Okay. Where are the women there? Very few. Where are the men of color? Even very few. And most of them, even in the non-STEM roles, the whites always predominate. Next one, please. So where are the women in STEM? So again, there are clusters of jobs where women are found. Obviously, health-related jobs are where most of them are. Life science jobs following math, physical science, computer, and engineering jobs, the lowest. So in addition to the fact that they have little representation, there is also that glaring pay inequity. Women, compared with men working in STEM, only earn 74%. Again, it looks like the Asians are doing better because they earn 127% compared to the whites. But which Asians are they is the main question. Next one, please. Median salaries, again, comparing 1995, 2003, and 2019 data, females again lagged behind their male colleagues, even in the SME professions. Next one, please. Now, when we go to NIH funding, I used to be a training officer for the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute, and I see all of them from fellows, pre-docs, postdocs, fellows, even the T32 directors who are, like at the top of the game. They can have programs under them. If you look at the NRSA funded graduate students, 56% are women. For postdocs are 55% women. K awards or career development awards, predominantly women. But when it comes to the RO1, which is the golden egg at the end of the grants panel, only 31% go to women. So again, a glaring inequity that you can see. So what I'm trying to say is that despite the gender parity in training, women are well trained. There is still that underrepresentation in biomedical professions. Again, at the instructor level, you have predominantly female, but by the professor level, you have only 26% of the faculty being female. Next one, please. You can represent it this way. Okay, so beginning from graduate studies as instructors, you whittle it down the line. And this is an academic medicine. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is also less women are nominated for awards. Thank God we have a Filipino woman this time for the Nobel Prize. Because if you look at the share of Nobel Prizes, women versus men, you can see that huge disparity between the sexes. Next one, please. Now, I don't know if people are familiar with the concept of intersectionality, but there are different kinds of biases that are applicable to women. One is race, as has been mentioned earlier before. The other is just being a woman, so gender. And so that concept, and especially if you're a woman of color, you have an intersection of both gender or sex and race, then you have an intersection of that two phenomena. You have a double whammy, so to speak. So people are saying that women are in a double bind. They have to work twice as hard, including in order to get half as much or get half as far. And then there's the maternal wall. There's the penalty for being the mother. Mothers are assumed to be incompetent and uncommitted. And then, of course, the gender wars, when gender bias turns into conflict among women. And all the others are, biases either for race or for gender. Next one, please. In my case, so I'm a woman of color, so that's already a double bias. In addition, I came to the country late in my career. I had already finished my chairmanship of a department in the College of Medicine in UP. So I'm an immigrant, not a spring chicken at that, quite old if you might say. Plus I have a foreign degree. I did not even graduate. I did not get my doctoral degree from the US. So I would say I was a case of a quadruple bind, not just a double bind. And although I was professor and chair, when I came to the United States, I had to start all over again up the career chain as a research associate. So as one of my former employees, if you want to put it that way. So what I'm asking is, number one, equity for women. And this has been acknowledged even by the president of the National Academy of Sciences, that the gender gaps must be addressed. And women are actually 50% of the population, and it's wasted talent not to use them or use their talents. So women in science need equal access to career building opportunities as well as equitable working environments to give them the resources that they need to thrive. Next one, please. Now, what about the Filipino or the Filipina in America? Again, I didn't have any source of data. We were hoping that UC San Francisco, which had already considered women, Filipinos as underrepresented groups. We thought maybe we can get some data there to make our case, but we had no data to speak of from any of the universities. So I'm asking all of our universities that are represented here, if you have a diversity, equity, inclusion officer, please do ask on our behalf for the PAASE, what are the numbers that they can give? As far as how many Filipinos are enrolled in STEM, what is the general population of Filipinos in that region? Now, California is different because most of the Filipinos are there, so they have greater representation. But in other states where there are few Filipinos, how many of those actually go into STEM? Now, of this census data, which I got from the US Census, I actually wrote to them and asked them. It seems that based on the latest data, there are about 3 million Filipinos, 43% males, 56% females, and among Filipinos over 25 years of age, a greater proportion of Filipinas have a bachelor's degree or higher than their male counterparts. And less than 50% of Filipino men and women 25 years or older have a BS degree, only 39%, or higher, meaning above a BS, maybe a master's, maybe a doctorate. In contrast, if you look at the data about Asians, 65% of Asians have a BS degree or higher. So clearly, we are not anywhere near what they call the Asians. Okay, so, and based on the US Census data from 2011 to 2015, they gave me actually the number of respondents anyway in their census who said that they had a doctoral degree. Only 0.008901 of the males and 0.008521 of the females over 25 years of age have doctoral degrees. That means even less than 1% of the Filipinos in the United States have a doctoral degree. So if that is not a case of underrepresentation, I don't know what kind of numbers you want. And as you notice, here we have the census data from 1993 to 2019. These are all underrepresented with a doctoral degree, for instance, or a master's. So the doctoral degree is the yellow one. It fluctuates between 5 and 8% of all URMs. We are even worse than the usual URM, 1% versus 5 to 8%. Next one, please. Now, Mavrin also alluded to this paper from the University of Buffalo, which was just published in September of this year, and it debunked the model minority myth that Asian Americans have uniformly high academic performance, because when you say Asians, that's not a monolith. It consists at least of 20 different ethnic subgroups with a broad range of languages, cultures, and histories. But they are always misrepresented as a homogeneous racial group. And then from this study, nearly 60%, Filipinos are nearly 60% less likely to major in science, technology, engineering, and math. And also from the study, they found that female Asian Americans were 46% less likely to major in STEM than their male counterparts. So if you multiply that with the already 60% less likely with another 46% of the 60% less likely, you can see how very few Filipino women are probably in the STEM fields. Next one. Which is a pity because the women's labor force participation rates are very high for Filipinos. So 2/3 of Filipinos were in the labor force in 2019, compared with only about half of Japanese American women and 59% of the all women cap. Next one, please. And Filipinos had lower unemployment rates than the average US woman. The top 10 occupations employing the largest number of women are teachers, nurses, nursing, psychiatric, and home health aides. And these are usually occupations where you find a lot of Filipinos, but they're not necessarily STEM occupations. And women with the highest median earnings, of course, are the doctors. Start with the radiologists, emergency medicine, surgeons, etc. While there are a lot of Filipino doctors, the participation of Filipinas in this kind of scheme is probably not as high. Next one, please. Now, COVID has been this monster that has been besieging us for the last 18 months, and it has a huge impact on women scientists' careers. We call it the pandemic penalty. Because of the pandemic, women have experienced lost jobs, reduced working hours, increased caregiving responsibilities, and of course, increased burnout and stress, which adds to their poor mental health. And even the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is not being misspelling his Portuguese, says that COVID-19 would reverse the limited progress that has been made on gender equality and women's rights. Next one, please. Now, the NIH always conscious. We have what we call the Unite initiative at this point. How did this pandemic affect our extramural community to whom we give out the grants? It turns out that the highest negative impact was on the postdoctoral fellow or resident, and you can see how the bar goes down. If you are already a full-fledged researcher, it doesn't affect you as badly as if you were in your early or mid-career. Next one, please. And the laboratory-based and computational researchers were the most likely to be impacted by this pandemic. The next one. And the survey shows also that these are the most usual reasons why the pandemic has a negative impact on their research careers. They have caretaking responsibilities, especially for young children. They have less access to research facilities and research staff, and lost access to collaborators. Next one, please. So the COVID-19 and the female workforce has resulted in what they call the exodus. Women, particularly women of color, are bearing the brunt of the economic fallout from the COVID-19 recession. So it's been called a she-cession because it affects women more than men. And in September 2020, roughly 4 times as many women as men dropped out of the labor force. Women are more likely to be the primary caregivers in their households. Layoffs and furloughs have been largely concentrated in female-dominated professions, including education. Women are underpaid relative to men and therefore more likely to give up their employment. Women make up a larger portion of the frontline healthcare professions. So COVID-19 did not create the gender inequity. It has merely amplified what we have known as the gender, racial, and ethnic inequities that Black, Latina, and Asian American women suffered even pre-pandemic. And so Filipino scientists are bearing all of the above. The largest share of migrant nurses to the United States are Filipino nurses, 4% of about 150,000. And in California, nearly 20% of the registered nurses are Filipinos, most likely working in acute care, medical, surgical, and ICU. In other words, frontliners in the care of the COVID patients. And as of August 24, at least 193 registered nurses have died of COVID, and 30% of them were Filipinos. Next one, please. So the American Association for Medical Women has this program called Give Her a Reason to Stay. because women in the workforce, especially in the healthcare workforce, are heavily impacted by the pandemic and even before. So what can you as an employer do, for instance, pay her fairly, promote her now, give her a grant or other grants to support her work, sponsor her for a specific career opportunity, ensure she has appropriate time off to care for herself and her loved ones, offer childcare, and provide a safe and harassment-free workplace. So I would like to posit that Filipinos in general should be considered as part of the underrepresented group in STEM, and the Filipino American STEM scientist is a rare and endangered species. So give her a reason to stay. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tigno. Since her presidency of us and we had a conference in Washington University, we've been together in our advocacy, and would like to thank you for continuing this advocacy. And I think we'll be here for a long time. We know how difficult or challenging it is. So we know it's a marathon. And Dr. Abowski, Dr. Summers know that they've been working on this the whole of their life. So it will be really challenging, but we persist. So we would like to invite those who would like to join us in this march. So, but before I call on our next speaker, I'd like to correct myself. I said that there's only one graduate student in this room, and it's Lowell. Actually, there are 3 graduate students in this room, and we're happy that those are the 3 of you. 4.
4, right? 4. No, wait, 3?
1, 2, 3.
Oh, I'm not in STEM though, but
So, you are visible, we see you.
thank you.
And now I would like to call on a champion of enhancing visibility among what Madrid holds minoritized students. Dr. Michael Summers is a distinguished professor of chemistry and biochemistry at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He is an elected member of the National Academy of Science. He is also a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator and has been instrumental in adapting the Marhoff Scholars Program in a number of universities across the United States, of course, along with Dr. Freeman Abowski. Dr. Summers is a mentor of mentors, and I consider him a mentor in mentoring. I'd like to call on Dr. Michael.
His first ever mentee was Roberto de Guzman, who's now a professor of biological sciences at Kansas University.
You're stealing my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have it set up already? Okay, great. So it's a real honor for me to be here. I want to start by saying that, acknowledging that most faculty in STEM in the US are white faculty. And I think you could argue that historically, it's the white faculty or white society that is probably, not probably, but responsible for the disparities that exist today. I hate painting anybody with a broad brush. I think it's a mistake to do with minorities. It's a mistake to do with a white population. But the fact is that it was only in my lifetime that the first Blacks were even admitted to many of our institutes of higher learning, including University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, that I'll be talking about later. So do you, it looks like you're not getting my presentation yet. I saw it was on your computer screen at one point. Do you want me to stop it? Okay. Oh, share it again? Okay. Okay. Oh, you, okay. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Share this one. Okay. Okay, perfect. So historically, as a group, we are responsible for the disparities that exist today. And the question is, can this group be part of the solution? I mean, it has to be, right? And so I want to tell you a little bit about climate change at UMBC. 1987 is when Freeman, Hrabowski, and I both joined the campus at the same time. And at that time, the Black students held protests because they perceived the campus as being racist. And now, according to the NSF, just this year, we're the top school of origin of Black MD PhDs and PhDs. We've actually been the top school of origin of Black MD PhDs for probably about 10 years. We're now the top school of origin of Black science and engineering PhDs, and Black graduation rates on our campus now are the same as white students, regardless of any program or regardless of your degree. So it's amazing how much the campus has changed. And I'd encourage you to look at this really nice video. Dr. Hrabowski won the UCSF Medalist Award last year. It's a really terrific job they did. So the Meyerhoff model, I'll just quickly go over it. It's to attract like-minded high achievers. About 70% of them are from underrepresented groups. There's intrusive support with high expectations that Dr. Hrabowski's talked about. There's a cohort learning model. That cohort model is heavily enforced. I just want to tell you quickly that we have a summer bridge, and the students in their math class are told that they need to learn how to work in groups. Now, if any of you have taught classes and asked the students to work in groups, you know that what happens is the well-prepared students get together, and then those that are less well-prepared are stuck working together, and nobody benefits. Well, in many of our summer bridge math courses, the students are told to organize into groups of 4. They take their first quiz, and then the group gets the average grade on the quiz. But even better than that, the entire class gets the grade of the weakest group. So now what happens is after the first quiz, the students are invited to rearrange. And so now you have the really well-prepared students looking for the students that need the most help, because they all want to make sure that as a group, they get the strongest grade. That's one example of the creativity that Dr. Hrabowski brought to this program. High exposure is really important for people like me. So I walk into a classroom with 350 students, and if those Meyerhoff scholars are spread around in the class, I won't see them. But if they have to be in class 15 minutes before class starts and sit in the front row and be shoulder to shoulder, when I walk in to prepare my lectures, there they are, I naturally start talking to them. And then they start raising their hands 10 minutes after I've started lecturing, and you start to get to know them. Not only does that affect the way I think about those students, it affects the way the other Black kids in the class and minority students think about them. These are other students that are maybe holding down jobs. They may not have the same preparation. And when they earn a C on their first quiz, their first instinct isn't, I don't belong here, because they see those students in the front, and maybe those students eventually are in the tutorial center as tutors. And so their expectations go up. And what do you think it does to the white kids in the class who see those students in the front doing well? So it's about seeing this for yourself with your own eyes. It's not going to a workshop, being taught what you should do. If you're programmed the way I was raised in the South, and you're confronted with this new paradigm, you are forced to go home and look at yourself in the mirror and think about things differently. And then positive messaging is so important. Freeman, Dr. Hrabowski empowered people like me to do more. He showed us the data. We wanted to have an impact, not just me, but my colleagues at UMBC. We're a mostly white school, wanted to try to make a difference. And then, of course, as Dr. Hrabowski said, early immersion in research. And I just want to point out, Roberto de Guzman on the left was one of my very first graduate students. He's from the Philippines. He trained the woman in the middle, Chelsea Stalling at the time, and they worked with another graduate student on the right, Justin Wu. All 3 are now faculty members. Roberto trained Chelsea. She was one of the first Meyerhoff scholars to join my lab. She's now an MD, PhD physician scientist at MD Anderson, at one of the top, probably the top cancer research institute in the country. And all three of them are on the faculty. Roberto is a full professor now at Kansas, and he has sent several minority students from his lab onto faculty positions as well. This is just a picture of my lab that was taken just before COVID. You can see it's a diverse group. So Meyerhoff outcomes, I just want to show you some of the data. We've had 1,500 participants, 71% are from underrepresented groups. We've had 1,150 graduates, 91% STEM retained. So think about that. These are kids coming in at 17 years old saying, I want to be a scientist, and they're being retained as scientists. 930 graduates pursued graduate or professional degrees. We've had already more than 300 PhDs awarded. Now people say, well, it's 70% minority, so maybe all your PhDs are going to that smaller group of majority students. It's not. 82% of the PhDs went to minorities. We've had 59 MD PhDs. 90% of those are to minorities. 256 master's degrees. 258 are currently enrolled in graduate school. So we've had a big impact, and this is where Ken Matten and Mario came involved. What Dr. Hrabowski did, I thought was brilliant. When he invited the students and their parents out of high schools to come to campus to learn about the program, he asked the parents to sign waivers that said, if we make your son or daughter an offer and you turn us down to go to the Ivies, in the early days, a lot of them did, that we could track them. And the parents said, well, sure, I don't care. They didn't know if they were going to get scholarships elsewhere. So we have this database now of students who, by every metric we could come up with, GPA, high school GPA, research experience, how well did you interact with people during our recruitment process? By every metric, they would have done well. If they go elsewhere, it turns out they'll graduate with similar GPAs, but they're half as likely to graduate with a STEM degree, and they're 7 times less likely to complete the STEM PhD. So people say, well, you're cherry picking, you're just choosing the best. Well, yeah, but there's a lot of cherries out there, and what we're doing is we're helping them achieve their dream. So we're having a broader impact. You've heard about Kismikia. She's just moved to Harvard. This is a picture of her at the NIH leading the COVID vaccine development at NIH. Yeah. Kind of scares me, and then this is Kafui Jirasa. He was one of the first Meyerhoffs as well. He was one of the ones that Dr. Hrabowski talked about that went to Duke, got his MD PhD, and they retained him on their faculty. Not only was he the Young Investigator Awardee of the Neuroscience Society, but this year, just a couple weeks ago, HHMI announced that he is now an HHMI investigator. And that's a big deal because I think he's the 4th Black HHMI investigator in the history of HHMI. We've had more than 40 of our graduates that have got their PhD, done a postdoc or 2, and now have faculty positions. And here's a picture of them. This is a terrific group of people. The vast majority of them are at Research One universities. And this is just some of the places that they're at. I can just tell you that several are at Hopkins. We have 4 or 5, I think, at Duke. We have 2 at Stanford, and then lots of others at other research ones. Now, can Meyerhoff be replicated? We are a majority institution with mostly white faculty, but we also have an amazing leader. And Freeman has been our moral compass from the beginning. And so the question is, can you do this at a place that doesn't have Freeman? Is it possible? And so, because that's what people said, we can't do this. My colleagues would say, we can't do this, we don't have a Freeman. And so that experiment begged to be done, and HHMI supported it. And so what we did is we partnered with 2 universities that are much different from us, UNC Chapel Hill and Penn State. Penn State is huge, 40,000 undergraduates in the middle of farmland, right? UNC has its own set of problems. It's half as diverse as UMBC. Actually, Penn State is less than a quarter as diverse as UMBC. But UNC has a problem with these racist statues on the campus and the history of inclusion. And so, can it be done at places like that? And what we found, all the assessment was led by Mario, who's the lead author on the science paper that we published. Yeah, absolutely. What we found is by us partnering with these other campuses, and by partnering, I'm talking about serious partnerships, their faculty and their leaders came to UMBC and participated in our summer bridge. They participated in our outreach activities. They learned why we take the cell phones away. And we have now the moral authority to go back to their campus and do those things, to hold the bar high, not just for the students, but for ourselves. What we found is that with that approach, STEM retention matched Meyerhoff retention in year 1. If you look at 4-year graduation rates, you can see UMBC in its very first year at the bottom, the graduation rate after 4 years wasn't high, but we still had a lot to learn. Dr. Hrabowski came in with these ideas and the faculty weren't buying in. I want to tell you a quick story. A colleague of mine was very much against doing the Meyerhoff program, a more senior colleague. And when we argued about it a little bit, he said, look, I went to school in the 60s at Berkeley. I'm the most liberal person you will ever meet. I've never voted for a Republican in my life. He said, but I don't think it's right to do something special for somebody based on race or gender. Now, 5 years later, we had a visitor to campus and we went to dinner. And this same senior colleague of mine was talking about the Meyerhoff program to the visitor. And he said, prior to Meyerhoff, if there was a Black student in his upper level chemistry class, they sat in the back, the kid didn't ask questions, and if they earned a C, he'd write a strong recommendation letter. He said, now there are larger numbers. They sit in the front of the class. They're always asking questions. They're in the tutorial center as tutors. And he said, now if a Black student earns a C on his first quiz, he calls him into his office to ask what the problem is. And I don't know if he gets it to this date, but his expectations and the way he reached out to those students changed. And that's so important for climate change, for cultural change. If you're at a white school like mine, you need to have a way for the faculty to change the way they reach out and interact with students of all backgrounds.
I can keep that chart just a cover for everybody in terms of culture change. That first UMBC one, we needed to give students opportunities to retake courses. They had so many C's. We had never seen a Black earn an A in another science course in the history of the university. So they retook courses, and I can tell you kids who got a C for the first time, maybe a B the second time, who went on and got an MD, PhD. Okay. You see, but it took time to change the culture. They graduated, they did, but it took them 5 to 6 years to do it. And they were in grad school. Now, if you look over here, you'll see, still see it's like 65–70%. We still give students opportunities to strengthen their backgrounds when they move to. Rather than quickly going to grad school and not being really prepared.
Right, that's exactly right. And then it took a while for the faculty to change their approach. And so it's a combination of things, not just the students that may have had to learn a little bit different, but it's also what are the faculty doing to help? Our bar was low. And so the dotted line shows the graduation after 6 years at UMBC. But the colored, the blue and the red are the first cohorts at UNC and at Penn State. And then the dark on the right is the matching present day cohort from UMBC. GPAs at graduation, you can see the gray at the bottom on the left, that was the first cohort of Meyerhoff's. It wasn't, it's better than the national average, which was 2.7 in STEM, but it's not what it is today. And you can see cohort 2, 3, and 4, there's a growth of GPA as the campus starts to buy in and learn how to do this right. On the other hand, because we could transfer all that information right away to UNC and Penn State, you can see that they are doing as well or better than the average Meyerhoff over the years. And then if you look at PhD matriculation, the first cohort of Meyerhoffs, most of them wanted to do an MD. And we talked about that. I still think that that's not a bad thing. I think it's more important to have large numbers of high achieving minorities in the classes than it is to just have a smaller number of those that want to do a STEM, because you're talking about changing campus culture. So you need numbers. And whether they are some of them now we have very few that go on to do an MD only. But back then, I think that was okay. And
this is related to the culture. Every Black kid would say, I want to be a real doctor. and then make them deep, right? So we have to really work with families. Get them to remove those PhDs is very prestigious. And finally, but it took time.
Right. Right. Yeah, I remember the first time that Dr. Hrabowski asked me to come and talk to talented high school students that they bring to campus as part of a recruiting tool. And I walked into this room. I was the only white guy in the room, and I'm up there talking to them about health disparities. And I said, you know, if you came with your dad, I want you to just look at him. And they looked at their dad and kind of giggled and things. And, you know, if your dad is Black, he has a 30% higher chance of dying of heart disease than his white friends. And then you could hear a pin drop. And then I talked about other health disparities that, if, you know, for women and things. And so it's a way of getting them to think about doing more than just using existing technologies and getting their parents to buy into the concept of an MD, PhD. And then minority participation was similar to Meyerhoff. And so I just want to point out that these things cost money. If you look at the money put in from their state budgets, the Chancellor Science Scholars Program, this is UNC, you can see they started by putting in $500,000. They got about $500,000 from HHMI in blue. But over the years, you see what happens is the leadership, you know, these kids go and have dinner with the president of the university and the president's mindset changes. I'm just telling you, when you walk in a room, things change. And so now the institution's putting more of their dollars into these programs. If you look at Millennium, the Penn State, they put a lot of institutional money. Now, this isn't new money. Most of this is just saying, all right, we're giving away a lot of scholarship money anyway. Why not wrap it in a diversity wrapper? Why not have an umbrella that includes a Meyerhoff-like component rather than just giving it to engineering students and science students in general? And then if you look at UMBC, we really rely a lot on fundraising. So a lot of our support comes from grants. Endowment building, after only 3 years, so UNC and Penn State, they wrote their programs into their capital campaigns after 3 years. 2 years after writing them into, or 3 years after writing them into their capital campaigns, UNC raised $16 million for its program, Penn State $12 million. There are people out there who care, wealthy people. And so if you start this kind of program, it's possible to find support. And I just want to show you a picture. This is the Meyerhoff replication program at Penn State. This is up in the upper right. You can see the president, the current president. He's about to step down, Eric Barron. I'll never forget, he was at a meeting and he said the DEI is not an assignable responsibility. Too many times these days, people are hiring chief diversity officers and saying, fix the problem, with no money. And then here is the Meyerhoff replication program at UNC. And I just want to talk briefly about Carol Folt, because she was the president when the students went in and tore down the statue that was called Silent Sam. It was one of their faculty that dug through the history books and found that that guy there was a statue to had actually bragged in the local newspaper about whipping the clothes completely off of a Black woman because she'd been disrespectful in the streets. And here's a statue to this guy. So the students tore the statue down, leaving a big granite base. Carol Folt wrote a letter to the, and there was a big effort to try to get the base removed. And the leadership in North Carolina said, no, we're going to build a temple to this thing and put it in there and have guards, because it's part of our history. Well, she actually arranged to have it removed, wrote a letter to the state legislature and said, I've had this removed. I will be happy to vacate my office by the end of the semester. She got a letter back saying, you can be out of your office in 2 weeks. So that's the kind of effort, that's the kind of guts. I mean, that's the kind of people we need in leadership. And now she's the president of USC. I would say it was a move up for her. And even West Florida. Now, this is my alma mater, and I wanted to put this in here because the two schools I just talked about, these were a top-down effort, okay, where the upper leadership said this is a priority. My colleagues and friends of mine at the University of West Florida said, Mike, we want to do something as well. I said, you got to get Dr. Hrabowski down. So Freeman flew down there and spent a day and talked to them about the program. I gave talk. I actually gave the commencement address. My colleagues in chemistry started by just having pizza gets-togethers with the minority students. And that led to more and more students getting involved. That led to them getting grants. They're now supported by major grants from NSF, NIH, and just this year, the president of West Florida is giving them a $500,000 a year annual budget to expand the chemistry Meyerhoff-like program to the entire STEM department. So, and they've got great numbers already. This is a part of the country, this is Pensacola, Florida, where nothing like this is going on. A huge Black population, actually a very large Filipino population because of the naval base there. And 63% of the minorities in their program are now pursuing PhD or MD PhDs, most of them at top 25 graduate programs. So I just wanted to point out two of them. Joshua Brown on the left, his father was a Navy man who was stationed in the Philippines. His mom is Filipino, same for Janae Brown. So there's a pretty big mixed race Filipino community in Pensacola. Janae now, she got her PhD in my lab. Josh got his MD PhD. This was at their graduation not that long ago. Janae is finishing up her postdoc in Atlanta, and Josh is a physician scientist doing his residency. Both of them are looking for positions in academics, or will be
My wife
soon.
and I were so impressed because they had the great romance in the lab. And what Mike is not saying is he gives a lot of his personal wealth to that program because University of West Florida sent him on from that small school to Emory to get his PhD and then NIH, and here he is member of the National Academy. It's a big deal. It really is.
Yeah, thank you. So the conclusions are large numbers who are interested in STEM. And get to the point that is the problem K through 12? Well, there is a problem in K through 12, but we typically get about 600 completed applications for a Meyerhoff program for about 40 minority slots. And most of those, 80%, are from Maryland or the Maryland area. If you think about Detroit, LA, all around the country, there's a lot of talent out there. And we're not doing a good job of retaining the talent that we already have that are coming to our schools. High achievers will succeed without our support, but they're much less likely to pursue a degree in STEM. Institutional partnerships work. I think that they can be a very effective tool for disseminating best practices. Rather than institutions competing with each other for federal dollars, we should be working together. And I think if there's anything that I've learned from Dr. Hrabowski, it's positive messaging, educating faculty and motivating them with data, and empowering people to be able to do something even more valuable with their lives than just publishing the next paper. And so strong alliances with like-minded colleagues is what I think is really important. And with that, I'm happy to stop. Thanks.
Dr. Summers, we would like to get the first question, from our own online audience, because pretty soon they'll be joining parallel sessions. Anyone from our online audience? Oh, okay. For Dr. Tigno from Francis de los Reyes, given the data of Filipinos are URG instead, should films not be under the group Asian in demographic survey categories? For that Pacific Island, there's no consideration.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah.
The pictures.
Oh.
Yeah, I think. Hello, Francis, can you hear me? So my answer to that is that the problem is not with being considered a specific islanders, which we were considered before and therefore enjoyed some kind of minority status, but the term Asian. Because you cannot just say Asian and now differentiate the different kinds of Asians. Because as we mentioned, the overrepresented groups do not consist of, a monolith of Asians. There are different kinds of ethnicities, places of origin, etc. religion. So I think we should disaggregate what we mean by issues rather than coin another term.
Thank you. For Dr. Summers, there's a question. As someone from the state of North Carolina, I followed the Silent Sun controversy closely as it was unfolding. While Carol Folt was tragically caught between the conservative BOT and DOG, the progressive students faculty, and you can tell she wanted to do the right thing. Her differing and wavering did not endear her to the progressive faculty and students. In the end, she did not get the support of her constituents. She could have spoken out clearly and loudly against the Silent Sun statute. The students and faculty would have supported.
Yeah, I don't know all the details of what went on behind the scenes, but I know that if you're in a leadership position at a university, you're trying to balance all of the different pressures that are coming from different directions. I think that early on, there was the expectation that if they made the best, strongest argument to the state would do the right thing. And there, she even enlisted the help of their students that are in their CSSB program to write a letter. Some of them even went to the state leaders to talk about why that statute had to be removed. And so my understanding is that she was doing everything she could do as a politician, as a leader, and trying to take a good political approach. And then when all of those efforts failed, then she was gone. But UNC does have a tough history with its presidents. Alden Thorpe, who was the president who started the replication program, had troubles with the when the grading and things with the sports teams, and then he had to leave. So I just think that would be, being a president of the university would be the toughest job that I could imagine. It's probably no wonder that there is a quite high suicide rate.
Thank you. I remember that Dr. Paul, got out of the events when we were still working with them on the marathon education program. Okay, the last question from Dr. Alvin Colaba before we say goodbye.
Hi, Dr. Summers.
Wait.
From the
It's
Philippines.
very faint. Wait. Can you wait? Can you tell him to repeat it?
What's that?
Tell him to repeat it. Repeat the question.
I'll repeat the question.
Okay, sorry.
Wait,
Thank you
no.
very much, Dr. Summers, for your presentation. I think I would like to ask Dr. Summers if this particular model, can this be replicated like in the Philippines? And if that is replicable, not to a developing country, or would you have any advice how to approach this?
Yeah, I actually think it can. We now are being supported by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. This is the Facebook people to help replicate this program at Berkeley and at UC San Diego. But maybe more relevant, we are now partnering with people at Howard University, because Howard University wants to have a high bar Meyerhoff-like program as well. Now, so we are already doing these kinds of works with a cross-country partnership. And actually, I think it could easily be done at an international scale, because we've learned so much just over the past few years because of COVID. And so I think that it's a matter of getting people together who would like to try to take this approach. That the Meyerhoff approach really does involve a commitment at the highest level of the institution. If you don't have that level of a commitment, then it gets very hard to sustain these kinds of activities. And they do involve outreach to high schools and community service kinds of activities that are hard for a faculty member to do, if not impossible. So you really need the resources of the whole institution if you want to try to replicate a Meyerhoff-like program. But I would love to talk to somebody. We have people from Cambridge University who are talking to us about, because they have a real issue with women in science and physics. and about whether we could work with them. And so we are thinking about trying to do something at a more international scale.
Thank you very much, Dr. Summers.
I have a same.
Thank you.
Alvin, you have a follow-up?
No,
Okay,
just
thank you.
No. Just say thank you.
Thank you very much. And we would like to say goodbye to our online audience because we know that parallel sessions are about to start at 10 o'clock. Yeah, I know. We're still continuing. We're just saying goodbye to the online audience.
Show the audience.
Got it.
Should I show the audience?
Yes, follow.
No, should I show the audience?
What?
Like, pan the camera
Yeah,
to the
okay.
audience. Are we done? So we're gonna. Okay. I can. Okay, or just do that.
Finish Francis first.
Okay, would love to get Dr. Tigno's take on what we should do. How do we advocate change demographic categorization of Filipinos?
So Alvin, I think, Francis, I think the number one thing I would do if I had the power, which I don't, is to ask the NSF to change its definitions. And I've actually tried to do this at the NIH because we have the so-called diversity supplement awards. And every time there's a Filipino that is applying for a diversity supplement, they will say, oh, but the NSF definition says that underrepresented groups consist of da. And then Asians are categorized as just one group. And we know that that's a misnomer. And so it should start from the federal government, I think, and NIH is just following the NSF definition. So probably somebody at the NSF should start.
That's right. And since we did this advocacy, we realized that many universities, probably 90% of the universities, don't apply disaggregation. They don't look at the specifics. Even in our universities, probably the universities that we belong to, when we ask the Office of Institutional Research, no, we don't disaggregate data. We just ask if you are Asian or not Asian, for example. So again, I would like to say goodbye to our online audience. We will be continuing our discussion. We have a question here from Dr. Joel Coelho.
Yes, it's for Dr. Summers.
Dr. Summers.
Yes. I'm an alumnus of Penn State, so I'm delighted to learn that they have adopted the higher program.